Over the past few weeks, we've been looking at God's design for the world, and for us, and for how our relationship with Him should be. But then last week, humanity chose their own path. And what followed was pain, suffering, shame, and ultimately being kicked out of the garden that God had designed for them. After God removes them from the garden, He promises them to suffer pain, but ultimate redemption. And Adam and Eve settle as farmers and ranchers. But after jealousy and fighting among Cain and Abel, the first death in the world happens. But unfortunately, humanity does not see the error of their ways and turn back to God. They begin to spiral deeper and deeper and deeper into sin. So that reminds me of a theological term that we have to learn. So why don't we head on over to our theological corner and talk? Our theological word for this week is depravity. The word depravity, if you looked it up in the dictionary, means moral corruption or wickedness. But in the Bible, it means more than that. It means that our hearts are bent towards evil. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't any good inside of us, but that the good inside of us is put there by the image of God Himself. Here's why depravity is so important for us. Because of the wickedness that we're born with. You see Jeremiah 17:9, Psalm 51:5, and Genesis 6:5. We have no ability to reconcile our position with God. We are at odds with Him, enemies or rebels. The concept of depravity points us to redemption. Welcome back. What a dapper fellow over there. So where were we? Oh yeah, so the world is spiraling out of control. People are killing each other. Pain, suffering, selfishness, and immorality are running rampant. It says in Genesis 6:5 that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, but that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Things are not good. It says that God is sorry that He has even made us. It's important that we understand that sin grieves God. But then hope emerges in a person named Noah. The very next verse says, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." And so what does God do? He decides that He's going to start over with Noah and his family. So He tells Noah that He's going to flood the earth. Now I know what you're thinking. That seems pretty drastic. Killing off all the people on earth except for about 10 to 15 seems a little bit over the top. We have to remember the past 4 weeks we've been studying. You see, God's design for the world, for humanity, has been corrupted. Without our sin, the flood would have never happened. There really just would be no need for it. So let's go back to week 1. The first 4 words of the Bible say, "In the beginning, God." You see, ultimately, the story of the Bible is not a story about us, but about God. So what does it say about God from His response to humanity's sin? Take a minute and think about that. God's response to depravity on the earth is that it pained Him. It broke His heart that the creation that was supposed to enjoy joyous fellowship with their Creator were using their newfound freedom for violence, for immorality, and death. And so God responds to the wickedness of humanity with a righteous judgment. That's a good phrase, righteous judgment. Remember, the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden was that they wanted to decide what was right and wrong on their own. The problem is they don't have the same information that God does. Imagine if you came to youth group this week and there was about 8 pizza boxes. I told you that you can eat from 7 of the boxes, but don't eat from the 8th. But instead of listening to me, you go ahead, you eat it, and immediately you get sick. What you didn't know was that I had found a cockroach cooked into the pizza, and they were coming back to get it. You didn't have all the information that I had. And if you had just trusted me and not eaten from the other box, you wouldn't be sick. But since you decided that you wanted to make your own decisions, you found a cockroach. This is what righteous judgment means. It means that God knows all the information and is making the best decision. And honestly, if you're really honest, we have no real right to question it. We just have to trust in a God who is both good and loving. So go ahead, take a few minutes and read Genesis 6:9 through 8:22. Now, I know we've heard this story a lot of times. God's frustrated with the world, pronounces judgment in the form of a flood. But then he provides redemption through a man and his family. It says that Noah found favor. That doesn't mean that Noah was perfect, or that he always made the right decisions, or even that he was entirely without sin. But it does mean that he tried to live in obedience to God to the best of his ability. God tells him the plan that Noah will be the center to the survival of the human race, but that redemption is still based on obedience. That Noah has to do exactly what God tells him he should do. And so Noah builds an ark, and God provides the animals. Now pay attention here. God tells Noah that the plan is that he's going to save humanity and animals through him. That's a pretty ridiculous task. But Noah believes that God is both good and loving, and he will not give him more than Noah is able to do. So he has faith and obedience to God. You see, for Noah, faith and right living please God. And so Noah does his part. He builds the ark, and then God does his part. He brings the animals and the rain. Sometimes we get caught up in this whole plan that God has, and we forget that God has a specific part for us. Not to bring the animals, not to make it rain, but to build the ark. Maybe for you, a conversation with a friend about how God has changed you is all that God is asking you to do. But all you can see is the heart transformation that only God can bring. Maybe God's asking you to simply look around for someone in your school who feels isolated, alone, worthless, and depressed. And if you simply open your eyes, you can be part of God's redemptive plan for them. Why don't you take a minute and think about some of the ways that you can demonstrate faith and obedience to God this week. When we read this story, we often forget that a real family built a real ark with real animals, and that family lived on that ark for almost a year. But we have to remember that trusting in God was vital to their survival. For you and I, we'll probably never have to build an ark. We'll never have to stuff a ton of animals on it and ride on a boat for like a year. But we are called to go to our friends, our family members, our neighbors, our coworkers, our team members, our cast members, our siblings, and the world. And we're told to make disciples, to show people how to follow Jesus, knowing that their hearts, even though they're created in God's image, are depraved by our nature. But ultimately, they can be transformed into a heart that follows God through obedience. So will you accept the calling for faithfulness, or will you unravel into corrupt practices and immoral hearts?